What actually started? I mean, you didn't just wake up one morning and Rocky Flats was aglow out there and say, "Ha, that's my next mission." How did you do that?
Oh, well, before I was an FBI agent, I was a police officer in Las Vegas, Nevada. And when I was assigned to Denver, one of the older agents decided that he didn't want to be the liaison with the EPA. And since I was the new guy, my turn in the barrel, so to speak, I was assigned to be liaison with the EPA, and which entailed this new concept of environmental crimes. What people don't realize is that Earth Day back in 1970 and the Clean Water Act and then RCRA and all the other statutes really didn't have a criminal bite until the 80s. And that was all being phased in. And the only thing I could justify to myself for this type of work was that I used to write littering tickets as a cop, so I had some environmental background. But that was just, all kidding aside, you know, I believed in protecting the environment, not to litter, those types of issues. And it was like about October of 1984, fresh out of the academy, and I found out that there was a seminar of sorts out in Los Angeles. And I went to my supervisor and asked him to go, and he said, "Well, we don't know if we have the money." And I said, "Bill," his name was Bill, said, "You're going to assign me to do a job, you need to train me." And this is, the word complex has no meaning compared to these types of investigations. Complex is nothing compared to working an environmental crimes case. And I'm going to need the training. So I talked my way into it and went. And having the background as a police officer, knowing my beat, so to speak, not just where buildings are, but to know where the people, who the people are, what shift they work, what back doors are open at night. That kind of minutia was the way, my style of being a cop. But I also wanted to know who the people were. I wanted to be able to interact with people. I wanted them to feel comfortable that they could tell me confidentially or openly. And you could say I work people, but I enjoy working with people. And because of that reason, I saw the need to go out and reach out to the environmentalists here in Colorado. So it wasn't just a matter of getting trained up on how to work these cases, but also I was interested in knowing what the people knew. In other words, pointers. Where could I go and look for things? And of course, the number one item on the list was Rocky Flats. But no one felt that anybody was going to ever be able to pierce that veil because the Rocky Flats plant was considered a secret place. And you know, a lot of people had been arrested for trespassing, and you know, it was just, it was untouchable, basically. And to make that long story short, it was always on the back burner. It was always an idea of sorts. And as I became more educated in the environmental crimes process and who the violators were, I found that the federal government was actually probably the biggest violator of environmental crimes. I put it at 28% in Colorado. And it was in June of 1987, and I got a call from Bill Smith. He was the EPA agent I worked with, and he wanted to show me something, but he wasn't going to tell me what it was over the phone. So I went out to the Denver Federal Center in Lakewood. How about that for a memory? And he had received a copy of the Mary L. Walker briefing memo from his boss. And what had transpired is that the Department of Energy was being looked at by a committee in Congress, and this memo had come up as being turned over to Congress. And it was a very damning memo about the operations at Rocky Flats, and that because of the operations, they were basically running an illegal operation in comparison to what the environmental laws were and the compliance that they were to look at. Now, I've read a lot of things, so, you know, I had sources over at Rocky Flats, and, you know, Jim Stone, God rest his soul, was a big whistleblower and all that stuff, and that's not what it was. the bottom line is the Attorney General guidelines have to be followed, and I needed a predicate reason to be able to investigate this case. And the whims and feelings and dreams of some people in the community was not enough to make it the threshold of being a predicate crime. But the Mary L. Walker briefing memo did. But you have to understand that politics is politics, and we're dealing with a huge political potato. And because of the politics at the time, meaning that a certain Robert Miller was the U.S. Attorney at the time, the prosecutor that I worked with decided he wasn't going to approach Mr. Miller about investigating Rocky Flats. So rather than having a full field investigation, I had a preliminary inquiry for over a year. And there was only so much I could do. I was constrained. In other words, I had to pretty much base everything on public record and what have you. But there was quite a record, believe it or not, that had been compiled by the then Colorado Department of Health and the EPA. And because of the delegation of authority being granted to the Colorado Department of Health, a lot of the records that weren't public were over at the CDH office, but we had some EPA people that were very helpful, as well as some Colorado Department of Health. And then, of course, Jim Stone was introduced to me, and quite frankly, I wrote down what he said, as I always did. And in my business, even though they've told me this, once they read what I write, and I wrote what they said, they like to do a 180, waffle, things like that. And but this is an unusual situation, because after hearing what Jim Stone had to say, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I just couldn't believe that 76 pounds of plutonium was trapped in the ductwork, and on and on and on. And it all made sense, what he said. You know, the negative ions with the plastic, and the filters were being poked, and, you know, things, that's how the plutonium was allowed to escape through. It was a huge puzzle with not all the parts. And it wasn't really clear for a long time. It sometimes isn't clear now what happened. You know, this was 21 years ago almost, since the search. So that's how Rocky Flats came into Crosshairs. It was working the cases. It was gaining credibility with the activists, some of the activists, I should say, and law enforcement communities. And it's no other way to put it, but just hoofing it, working hard, getting the job done. And I was very fortunate, but I also felt like I put myself in a position to where these opportunities could happen. But I also know that without one of the U.S. attorneys that I work with, this case would have never gotten off the ground. I mean, this was a case where that could have easily just been shelved. No, we're not going to touch this.